everyone. We're going to be trying something a little different, and I'm a real YouTuber who uses a little Lav Mic, but I wanted something really simple to edit, really clean. So I'm going to be straight up. This video is mostly so I can put out a piece of content. What I mean by that is when you work with YouTube, the algorithm that one works with so that your videos can perpetuate, so that they can try to get, as many views or whatever. When you work with that, something that is very valued by the algorithm is consistency. And I upload twice a week. If I all of a sudden miss an upload, that instantly penalizes me. And all this work that I've been doing really well for a couple months now. And I didn't want that all to go to waste because I missed one upload due to no fault of my own, just a series of freak accidents. And then the algorithm is just like, oh, well, this is not a serious creator. So that's what this is, but I want to put in a little bit for everyone. I want one to get something out of this. I'm going to try to keep everything as concise as possible. I am extraordinarily exhausted, and my health is really just it's essentially like I took out a very, very high interest loan to be able to get everything done, and now I am paying for it. So I want to start with just a little tiny explanation. I have written a bit about this on Patreon, a little bit on the community tab for YouTube, but basically last Friday at 11 p.m. we lost power because a historic snowstorm, the biggest my area has ever had, period. It had caused some trees to fall and ripped my power cable from my house. And then it was a series of problems after that. So we had to leave, and I only just got back. So I've been away for a week, and there is a lot to clean up, and there is a lot to try to figure out before I can figure out how I move forward with my channel. So that's a little bit about it. So because of this mess, luckily I rent. So in terms of the electricians and, all the plaster work and the plumbing and all that, I haven't had to pay for that. Very, very privileged for that. But we lost a lot of food. So because of the storm, since we knew it was coming, we bought a bunch of food in bulk, and we lost a lot of that. We had just purchased it a few days ago, or a few days previous. So I don't often ask for help. That's, generally I just kind of grin and bear it and take on debt, and I don't ask. I don't like to mess with anything in terms of money. If you happen to want to, don't feel pressured, don't any of that. I would appreciate it, if that's something you can help with. I'll just put, my Patreon, and then you would get things like early access, Patreon exclusives, audio downloads, stuff like that. So you would get something out of it. It's going to be a little wacky this month before I get things cleaned up. And there's also a Ko-Fi, which is a one-time donation. Please don't feel like you have to. It's just between the food. I just found that a lot of my makeup got ruined because of an accident during transport, so that's going to need to be replaced. I'm going to lose a lot of wages because of this. I mean, if you happen to, if you don't, that is okay. I will muddle through. It is fine. I've done this a lot. Me and my family have a lot of experience with this. It's going to suck for a while. That's just how it works. Not a big deal. Now, while I'm here, while I'm just making a video, which is basically like just trying to stay in the algorithm, I wanted to talk a little bit about disaster preparedness, prepping, what have you. So I am an extremely anxious individual. It is a symptom of being extremely neurodivergent. So this works for me. I'm very privileged that it often works for me in a crisis. I am the calm in a crisis person because I've already foreseen this happening, basically. So my family has a saying, we have a motto: if it's not a crisis, it's a catastrophe. With my family, if anything could happen, most people don't think things will happen to them. We know they will happen to us. So you prepare accordingly. So we had known for a few days this was going to be a bad snowstorm, but it didn't occur to anyone how big it was going to be until like the day of. So in terms of disaster prep and whatnot, this is something that people do need to be serious about. People don't often like to think about bad events happening, bad things happening, but these are things that doesn't have to be like that you're being hysterical or whatever. I often get told I'm hysterical about it, but I take it seriously because you never know. You never know. I've lived through several historic weather events lately in the last 5 years. At some point, it's like, it's just not smart to not think about it. So what I do, and you can look at websites, I'm just going to give you like a little bit of what I do, not a definitive guide. Certainly can search that on the web for something more comprehensive. So I knew it was coming. I kept my phone charged 100% the entire day because I knew there was a huge possibility we would lose power. Another thing you do is you make sure you have candles and something you can light it with, matches, lighters, things like that, in case you need light, flashlights and batteries. And when the power did go out, we were very lucky that it's winter. So it was 11 p.m. when it went out. We saved as much food as we could. Unfortunately, we didn't have many coolers, but it's very snowy. So we're out at midnight shoveling snow into plastic bags and shoving as much as we could into a couple of small coolers and putting bags of snow in between things. And snow, if it's in a cooler, a lot of it did not melt. It stayed very well. So we were able to keep a good amount of fridge food. We lost everything in the freezer, unfortunately. But, you know, you kind of have to make a plan, like, what are you going to do about food? You know, do you have non-perishables, you know, like nuts, dried fruit, canned goods, meat sticks, things like that, like things that are not going to go bad. Need to make sure you have some of those. And I already kind of keep a little disaster bag, if you will, which is what I use if I go places. I have a lot of things. I have to bring a lot of medication, a lot of things for accommodations and whatnot. So I already have like a template, basically. And I have a list in my phone of everything I need to pack. So this came nice and handy this time. All I had to do was grab a couple of things instead of scrambling. So keeping a list of things you need, being very honest about the things you need as well. So I know that if I get bored, if I start ruminating, things are not going to go well for me. I'm good in the middle of a crisis. Before the crisis and after the crisis, not so much. Repression has gotten me very far this week, we'll say that. So I needed to make sure, I had to be very honest. What can I do to alleviate sensory issues? Issues because my routine is getting interrupted. Issues with boredom, things like that. So I packed like colored pencils and paper, or I had my computer and my laptop charger, and I had a couple of books, keeping yourself occupied. Because when these things happen, you want to treat your phone basically like a brick, It's there for communication. So as soon as the power goes out, I flip it to maximum power saving. It's not coming off that. No data, no Wi-Fi, nothing else. It's there for calling people. That's it. And that way it can last a lot longer. So then you have to keep yourself busy in other ways. So I did do some coloring. I read a book, did some writing, things like that. But it's stuff you have to really look at this situation honestly, yourself honestly. Like, what is going to get in the way of me coming out of this, still, I don't want to say mentally sound, but things that are going to allow you to not just survive. Like maybe a step up from surviving. Not thriving, but, you're doing okay. You're doing okay. So just keeping stuff, like boredom at bay, that helps a lot. Having solutions to that, just looking at what you really struggle with when you're uncomfortable, and then trying to figure out solutions. So I also pack a lot of medication that I have. I take a lot of medication to stay alive, woo. So then I try to keep a supply of, when I renew my prescription, those extra pills I usually will save so that I have some extra medication. Ideally, you would have a week. 2 weeks might be better, just in case if you're reliant on medication. And I also had, bottles, just those clear plastic bottles of shampoo, conditioner, body wash, face soap, face lotion. Do you need a set of eye drops? Things like that, like all the things you use. A trial size version, or getting an empty little bottle and putting these in a bag. I usually separate things with plastic bags because that's super easy, like grocery sacks. So it doesn't have to be a whole thing. It's just taking a bit of initiative. Like if something happens, and you know what, this is really easy, just for if you're going on a trip. This doesn't have to be just for disasters. It could be, all of a sudden you want to go over to a friend's for a couple of days, or your family, and you already have a bag that's halfway packed. You just have to put clothes in it and a few odds and ends. There you go, So I find that because I did all this disaster prep beforehand, because naturally I think about those things, that helped me so much. We had to leave our house at 5 a.m. the next morning. So I'll tell you a little bit about what happened now. So lost power at midnight, or at 11, and didn't go to bed until 12:30. And because of the way that we lost power, because the trees had fallen, it's funny because over the over 2 hours before, I had been hearing every 30 seconds to a minute, it sounded like the snowplows were scraping the road. But that's not what was going on. They don't come around here. Plows don't come around here. We're the lowest priority. But it was happening over and over 2 hours. It was a long process. And then I realized later it was because the tree was cracking under the weight of all the snow. So when it hit, we thought like a family of raccoons had fallen out of our attic. Basically, it was so loud, it shook the entire house. And instantly the power got yanked out. So first thing I do, we had flashlights. You grab a flashlight. I immediately grabbed some things to make sure that I was warm, shoved the curtains closed to try to keep in heat, and I got the cats in our room. And then it's, what happened? What can we do? Can we save the food? I talked about putting food in coolers with plastic bags full of snow. So we did that, and then it was a matter of, okay, how are we going to get through this if they can't fix our lines? Because immediately it was apparent that it wasn't going to be able to get fixed very quickly because the lines were still hot under fallen trees. And we had left, and I had mentioned that I rent, so my landlord was dealing with this, but there was a confusion. I mean, there was kind of a back and forth on whose responsibility it was to remove the trees, and nobody could move further until the trees were removed. And it was going to take a lot of time if the energy company needed to do it, because again, our roads are lowest priority. No plowing, nobody can get through. Our cars were stuck. My family ended up having to come get us because we couldn't leave. So the trees were going to make it so we weren't going to have power for a while. Luckily, my landlord had to call a few different people and get that taken care of regardless. So the power itself came back on Sunday, so a couple days later. But I have pretty bad asthma, and I can't breathe under 60 degrees. So I had to go to bed wearing a mask, and I had to make sure that I kept the air around me very warm, because otherwise I will have an asthma attack, and I have an expired inhaler, because in the scheme of all of my illnesses, that hasn't been a priority yet. So, I had to be very careful about that. And when we woke up, it was 53 degrees inside the house. So we couldn't stay. And by the time we left, it was 41 degrees in the house. And my family came and got us. Luckily, living out in rural country, they had a 4-wheel drive truck. So they came and rescued us, and we loaded up everything, loaded the cats, everything we could, and went back to my mama's house and stayed there for a bit. So power comes on. There was a breakdown in communication that even though the power came on, that did not mean that it was habitable. So we come back and the roads are awful, completely awful. Very, very, very bad. It takes us a very, very long time to get back. And the furnace had broke and the stove wasn't working. So we come in the house and it had gotten down to 9 degrees in the house, and we walk in immediately. All of our plants are dead. I think we had over 100. I mean, and this is counting, even the little guys. And I was thinking about it, and originally I thought that I'd only had these things. The oldest was 6 years old, but I forgot that it's actually been 9 years for me, and my partner's had some at least 7 or 8 years. So we're talking closer to 20 years combined collection. And most of these plants we didn't buy, we grew them ourselves. So that's all gone. It's all gone. When a plant gets too cold, a tropical plant or a temperate, in the case of some of my cacti, the cells burst. They explode. So now my sunroom smells like rotting lettuce left in the sun now that it's warm in there. So that's going to be a real headache to clear out. So, our plant collection is gone. The house is covered in road salt, and you can't take your gloves off. It's freezing cold. Everything just feels really dead. It feels dead. And so it was clear that it wasn't going to be habitable. Luckily, we had a couple of friends to stay with, and then eventually we went back to my mama's, but it became a whole thing. I mean, we had 10 pipe breaks, so my downstairs ceiling is covered in patches. The wall is. They had to take apart the wood paneling, and in my bathroom, there's a bunch of patching. So they had that, and then luckily the furnace, the problem with that was the thermostat, so that was an easy fix, thank God. We were thinking it froze, so that worked out fine. And the stove, luckily it was just tripped because of the power outage, because of the surge, so that ended up being fine as well. So when we got home this time around, when it was actually habitable, everything's still covered in road salt, even more than it was. My beautiful hardwood floors covered in road salt, and plaster dust. Everything's coated in plaster dust. So we have our dead plants, we have the plaster, we have the salt. So it's just been a bit of trying to figure out how to clean things up, basically. Luckily, we got things mopped up. We got some of the plaster dust taken care of, starting in on the plants. But big picture is it's a mess. It's a mess. And it's going to take a lot to get this all figured out. We're going to try to talk to our renter's insurance people and see if we can salvage anything. I'm not sure, but we've spent a lot of money in replacing things, so it's just disappointing that we bulk bought a lot of food and we lost it because of the snowstorm, but it kind of is what it is. Like, I'm very lucky we got to come back home, and really it was rather short considering it was only a week, and everything, for all intents and purposes, is going to be back to normal. It's just going to take a lot of elbow grease. So it will end up being okay. It'll be okay. It's just going to take a lot to get there. So in terms of what it means for my channel, as I had mentioned before, I am rather ill because of all of this. Just, I did really, really well with, we had to leave the house at 5 a.m. I had woken up at 4:45 on Saturday morning, so I had 3.5 hours of sleep. And, we got the things done. We got it done. It wasn't pretty, but it ended up being okay. So I don't know if I'll end up having rebound sickness because of this, which is like you start getting better and then all of a sudden it takes you down real bad. I don't know. I'm going to try to work on it not doing that, but I'm continuing to push past my limits because this is just kind of how it is, how things need to be done. I have had in this last week more activity multiple days than I've had in almost 4 years, I think. 3.5, 4 years since before I got sick. I don't know how it's going to affect me, but my first priority is getting my house situated and then coming back to filming. So I missed filming so much. Oh my god, I was going crazy. I had prepped so much because I knew it was a possibility that we would lose power. So I filmed ahead, like I had so much. I was doing really, really well. So I'm very disappointed. But we'll just keep going. That's just kind of how it is. So I'm going to leave it at that. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep rambling, I guess. And that's all really that we need to know, is just that it's going to be a work in progress for a while. And because of the nature of everything, I'm going to be ill for a while. And I will just keep muddling through. It's just going to be touch and go for a while. So I'd like to thank you for watching. And I'd like to thank you for your continued support, for your patience, for everything. And I'm just very, very appreciative. I'm super privileged to be in this position that, like, I have so much flexibility. So really, everything has been as ideal as it could be. It still sucks. Still sucks, but it'll buff. So thank you for watching. I hope you have a whale of a day and a good rest of your day.